I'm now going to go into some of the more advanced features within the Simsol system. So I'm going to go into the scope of damage. And I already have a pre-existing estimate already there. So we're going to be talking about the function called macros, okay? And what that does is it really saves a lot of time because you can define the scope once the scope is defined, and then you can use it system-wide. So I'm going to come up here and go to a kitchen. Here we go. And what this is that when making up a macro, I must define scope. So a little trick is that if you already have areas already defined that you want to use for your macros, go into those claims, go into the scope of damage, bring up the area name, and then you can just copy the scope for your macro. And that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to come up here and click on list. And as you can see, I have a macro here for a kitchen. Okay. And I want to make sure that, let's say if I was going to come down here to the replace drywall and wood framing, if I double click on that, it's 4 foot high. So I know that this scope right here is going to be 4 foot high for my drywall. And that's an important point because remember, macros have no bearing on price, and macros will retain the area percentage plus the height. So that's really important. So if you're doing floods from 1 inch all the way up to probably just under 4 foot, then you could probably use this macro at 4 foot, and it saves you a lot of time to make sure that all the components or all the line items are set to the appropriate height levels. So basically what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to make it full screen so you can see it. Here's my scope, and that's what I want to do. So the first thing when you create a macro is define the scope. In this case, I already have the scope defined. So you're going to pick all these line items, or like I said before, a little hint, go into a pre-existing estimate, just like I did here, and then I can come up and select it, go to list, and verify the scope. Now, there's 2 types of macros that we can create. We can create an area macro, meaning a kitchen, with all the line items in there pertaining to that. Or I can make an assembly macro, which just little macros, like a door assembly. I can come up and say, I want R&R door, along with the remove and reinstall the lock set, paint the door, and make sure that we have all the components just addressing a door. Or I can make one for drywall. So I can have unlimited macros within the Simsol system. So for example, let's make our first macro. So I'm going to do an area macro. So I'm going to select the first one, which is flood loss cleanup. And then I'm going to use my shift key, and I'm going to go to the last one and hit the shift key, and everything is going to mark in blue. What you need to be aware of that is if anything in blue is going to be part of the macro, and that's marking it for the macro, okay? Once you have that all selected in blue, I'm going to come up and then select macros from the main menu up here. Not this macro button here. That's a play macro. I have to create the macro in order to play. I have to record, excuse me, I need to record the macro instead until I play it, okay? So I'm going to click on macros, and I'm going to select record macro. As I do this, the window comes up, and I'm going to say R and R kitchen flood 4 foot high. So I can select that. Now, anything, like I said before, anything in dark blue, that's going to give you that, it's going to give you that scope, anything in blue. So as I click on done, the macro has now been inserted. And that's how easy it is. I'm now going to do a drywall macro and including the paint. So for example, watch this, it's really cool. I'm going to come up and do the remove drywall, and I'm using the control key to individually mark the items that I want. In this case, I'm going to select the paint one first coat, second coat, remove base molding, replace base molding, and paint base molding. So you can see I have numerous operations for this R&R drywall 4-foot, and that's what I'm going to name it. I'm going to come up here and go to the main menu where it says macros, and I'm going to use the option called record macro. As I do that, I'm now going to give it a name, and I might call it assembly drywall with paint. So as I do that, I then come up and select done. That's now been saved because it was in dark blue, and it's ready to be used. So I'm going to get out of this for just a second, and I'm going to create a new area. Now when I do this, I'm going to select, let's say, 20 by 20 room. So I'm just going to name it. I'm going to then put the dimensions in of the room. Let's say this is on a new claim. Got the height in there at 8 foot. There it is. And I'm now going to click on scope to launch the VSS. I now have the VSS, and I'm going full screen so you can see it a little better. And I'm now going to invoke the macro. The button that I told you not to push, it's time to push it because this is only a play macro. So as I select it, I can come up and then select R&R Kitchen Flood 4 foot high and select done. Now, it'll stop with this macro display window. Now, what I tell everybody to do is hit process all macro items using the original height areas. So if I had 4 foot, it's going to retain that 4 foot. Okay, and then all I have to do is hit accept. Once I make sure that the process has been accepted, it's going to rip through the estimate, but then stop on anywhere that it needs a price. In this case, I have the NFIP dryad allowance with HVAC. I can then put 32 cents in. So as I do that, I can then select done, and the macro will continue. All right, and here I have a good wood base linear foot. I can say it's 12 foot. And then I have a backslash, let's say that's going to be 13 feet. So it's continuing the macro that I had. It's asking me for a refrigerator number. I'll say model, let's say KitchenAid. And select make model serial number. So I can place that in there. It is going to stop wherever it needs information. So as I do that, it's going to ask me for another thing. I can say Sears. I'm just putting something in here just to put something in, and you'll see it. You can always, after the macro is run, go in and edit it. I'm just going to put Sears in here again as well. These are all my appliances, by the way. So as you can see, these items have now been picked, but the proof is in the pudding. If I click the list button, there is the macro that I have created. Check this out. This is so cool. I've got the HVAC in, but check this out. I've got the paint walls, but it retains. So the first coat, second coat, third coat. Let's take a look at our replace drywall, and it's replacing it 4 foot, exactly what I wanted. Okay, so you can then go in here and select it. Now, one thing that's really nice is once you get your scope defined, is if I've got one for 4 foot, I can then just modify that to 8 and then resave it or re-record it using the macro record button. Okay, if there's something that you don't need in this macro, then please get rid of it. So for example, if I need to get rid of the outlets, it's easier to delete than it is to add. I don't have to search for it. It's right there. And then all I have to do is select delete. Here I've got the remove stainless steel dishwasher, the gas range, and the refrigerator. This is where you're going to see your notes. Okay, there's the Sears that I put in. This might be my first note that I put in. So it stops wherever it needs data information. Okay. So as you can see, I have that one in there. To run the other macro, which is called an assembly, I can then create a new area. Let's say bedroom. Give it some dimensions. I'm just going to say it's a 10 by 10. Okay. So once I do that, click on scope, and this time I'm going to use an assembly macro. Now, what's nice about an assembly macro is that you can say, okay, I have one for floors, I have one for walls, I have one for ceiling, I have one for other things, specialty items. So I could build my whole area by just using the assemblies. So as I do that, I come up and select the macro and say, oh, there's the assembly, R&R drywall with paint. So as I do that, I click on done, hit process. Remember, hit the process, click on accept. So as I do that, then I have that in there. So you can see how I do that. So as I click on list, there is my different macro for that assembly. And that's it for macros. Okay, it's real easy to do. I'm going to get rid of these.